Welcome to Out of the Blue, number 41. So, I wanted to back up a bold claim I made the other day. The bold claim being that Neo-Swedenborgianism makes atheism obsolete. And what I have here is the scientific method, and what I'm going to present to you is the scientific method proof of God. This is a calligraphy tool I use. It's a grid that you put paper over, and so you can keep your writing even. And the grid is 13 by 13. Alright, so here's a square. 13 by 13. So 13 times 13 is 169. 5% of 169 is approximately 8. So I'm going to mark off 8 squares in this grid. Okay, 8 squares. That is 5% of 169. Rounded to the nearest whole number. So before I go on, I will say that this is not a proof from the Bible, and this is not I am not a theist apologist. Some people might say, well, does this mean, what I'm saying, does this mean the Bible's true? Or does this mean you have to start liking church people? No, this is not. I am not supporting the Bible. I am not saying that you should start liking church people. What I am saying is that due to advances in science, the question of whether God exists or not, yes or no, can now be answered in the affirmative. So, I'm going to start with the point that's going to catch most people up is this, what I'm calling the apparent hyper reality. ARH. The apparent hyper reality is going to be, this hinges on this apparent hyper reality. The apparent hyper reality is something you read about in near-death experiences, if you read them, and it's something you read about in Swedenborg. Swedenborg said that what he saw, it was self-evident. So he doesn't really go on to try to prove it beyond that. And the people with the near-death experiences say that what they saw was more real than real. And so there is an experience within life, because the near-death experience people, since they are here to tell us about it, were not really dead. They were still alive in some way. They still had some thread of life in them, to the point where they are now back telling about it. So the near-death experience has to be seen as a part of life. So there is a part of life wherein the tunnel of light. Now, Susan Blackmore has explained that the tunnel of light is an illusion that is brought about by the retina. Now, remember that I showed you this the other day? The God illusion. But just the fact that she explained it like that does not make it go away. She just explained it. It's like saying that a movie, when you go see a film, it's actually just light projected through a little film. It is an illusion of movement. But you still want to watch the film, right? You don't. The person saying, well, we're go to a movie, why should we go to a movie? It's just light projected through a slide. Well, they're correct. It is just light projected through a slide, but you still want to go see it, right? So, the tunnel of light, the experience of this, what I'm calling the apparent hyperreality. So, when I'm talking about this 5%, that is a low estimate of, if you read near-death experiences, it's usually more than that, 15 to 20%, but just to be safe, I'm saying 5%. Now, this apparent hyperreality, what they saw was more real than real. So I've never had this experience. I've never had a near-death experience, but I've read enough of them to come across this quite a number of times. And what this experience does is, as I've said, it usurps reality. It is a greater reality. It is an apparent greater reality. So, this experience of an apparent greater reality, an apparent hyperreality, we do not have to conclude that there is a greater reality. It does not force us to conclude that heaven is real. But since it comes up so consistently, we have to conclude that it is a part of life. There is something in the neurochemical reaction of the dying brain that gives an apparent hyperreality to the person experiencing it. And this is long established. It's been studied since the 70s. So, now let's look at the scientific method for a moment. The scientific method, as I wrote it out here, there's 4 parts. Identify a problem, collect data, form a hypothesis, empirically test the hypothesis. So before we move on to God, let's just start with a Ferrari. Let's ask, our problem is, do Ferraris exist? And so we go out in the street and we watch cars go by, all day we watch cars go by. We watch 100 cars go by, we don't see a Ferrari. We watch 1,000 cars go by, we don't see a Ferrari. But finally, after watching 10,000 cars go by, we actually see 5 Ferraris. So that means 0.05%, which is 5 per 10,000, of the cars we saw are Ferraris. So this is collecting data. So we identify a problem. Do Ferraris exist? We've collected data and we said that out of 10,000, 5 of them are Ferraris. We form a hypothesis that Ferraris make up about 0.05% of the observable cars. Somebody else empirically tests this, and they come up with a similar number. Maybe they come up with 0.1 if they live in a fancy area, or maybe they come up with 0.001. They see 1 in 100,000. But for something to exist, the percentage of time you have to see it has to be greater than 0. If it's greater than 0, it exists. So even if it's only 0.001, that still counts. So the size of the number does not affect the existence or non-existence. So now we have the problem of God. Does God exist? It's a yes or no question. So either God exists or God doesn't exist. Now, the reason we can do this now, and we couldn't have done it 100 years ago, is that advancements in science have given us new information. Due to the advancements of science, we have people who are brought back from the brink of death. And in at least 5% of the cases, okay, they claim to have They go to heaven, they meet grandma, and they see God. I've never had this experience. I have not had a near-death experience. I've only read about them. But there is a statistically consistent result that these people have this hyper-real experience of seeing God. Now, if we're going to be scientists, we cannot explain it supernaturally. So we cannot say, well, they went to heaven and saw God, which is what some people say. So, as scientists, we have to have a natural explanation. So, there's a neurochemical reaction in the brain that causes people to have, you can say it's a hallucination, but you have to accept that it is a hyper-real hallucination. It is a hallucination that seems more real than everyday life. So, there's a set of circumstances in human life in which 5% of people have this hyper-real experience. So we have the problem: is there a God? We collect data of these people who have died, and their hearts stopped, their brain waves have stopped, and they come back, and we hypothesize that a percentage of people are utterly convinced, to the point where they completely change their life afterwards, that there is a God. So the hypothesis is that greater than 1% of people have an experience of seeing God in these near-death type experiences. That can be empirically tested, and it already has been empirically tested. It's been studied for years. Some people are trying to prove it's another dimension. Some people are convinced it's heaven. As a Neo-Swedenborgianist, we don't do either of those. We say that Swedenborg saw this space, and it was in his head. And these near-death experience people see this space, and it is in their head. It is a product of human physiology. So another common complaint is it's only a human construct. And if we look at the Ferrari again, a Ferrari is a human construct. And if a Ferrari is coming down the street towards you at 100 miles an hour, even though it is only a human construct, you better get out of its way, because it can run you over. The complaint is only 5%. Existence, the question of does it exist is not really contingent on how common it is. It can be extraordinarily uncommon and still exist. So, near-death experience, this apparent hyperreality, is more common than a Ferrari. And the other thing is, it's only in your head. And as I've established in a previous episode, in your head is a place. It is a neurochemical reaction in your head that we as humans perceive as God. And if there is a situation, a circumstance wherein humans consistently perceive the existence of something, in this case God, and it can be shown to be statistically consistent, that counts as existence.